Members of Belfast Trades Council and ICTU Youth got together a few months ago when it was announced that the G8 Summit would be held in Fermanagh. And we decided that, like the many activists around the world before us who have protested in Genoa, in Geneva, in Edinburgh, in Toronto, in Camp David, and in Evian, that we had a responsibility to create an alternative voice to the nonsense, the spin, the lies, the propaganda which will flow from the politicians and the ever-compliant media about the real purpose of the G8 Summit. From this platform and from this venue and from other venues over the next couple of days, the message will go out loud and clear that those G8 politicians are not welcome in Ireland. We will also demonstrate that another world is indeed possible. It is interesting that this summit is being held in the year of the 100th anniversary of the Dublin lockout, a seminal moment in the history of this island. So 100 years after the Dublin lockout, we now have a military lockdown as they corral themselves onto a small island in the middle of the beautiful lakes of Fermanagh. I'm sure many of you would agree that rather than a lockdown, these bastards should be locked up. Locked up for their crimes against ordinary people. Crimes which include murder and illegal wars by stealth bombers and drone attacks. Murder by economic policies which facilitate the death of people across the globe, while the capitalist system continues to devour the world's natural resources and dispense with expendable people. That's really all of us in this room. 60,000 people starved to death today, and yesterday, and will tomorrow, and the next day. Not because the world doesn't have enough food or resources to feed people, but because the world's wealth rests in the hands of a few. 1 million people die each and every year from malaria. It would take just 1 billion to eradicate malaria forever. Does anyone think that G8 will do anything about that? Not a pup's chance. But all of them can justify trillions of dollars, of pounds and dollars being spent in wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, in Libya, or the next country on their list. With the destruction of tens of thousands of our brothers and sisters, all for the advancement of capitalism or neoliberalism, or as my son Padraig quite correctly has more recently labelled it, economic fascism. Let's be clear about this. Capitalism hates you. The biggest threat to world peace and world hunger and full employment and poverty and lack of adequate health provision and care for the elderly is the G8 leaders and everything they stand for. The G8 is a self-serving, self-selecting group of political leaders of the richest countries on earth. They represent, however, a mere 12% of the world's population, and yet their policies affect everyone. They claim to come together to provide stability in the midst of crisis, and yet 38 summits later, the world is more unequal than ever. Economic instability has grown alongside war and devastation for many. The arrival of the G8 in this part of Ireland has, however, provided an opportunity for wider debate, and we thank them for that. Set aside and set against the backdrop of escalating political and sectarian tensions here over the last few months, it is crucial that an alternative narrative is created which promotes dialogue and activity across the entire community and provides an explanation of the direct connection between economic changes being imposed on communities and the consequential rise in social problems which accompany those economic policies. By their presence, the G8 have inadvertently given us a space to bring together progressive forces of the left to debate these issues, and they have reignited a fire in many of us. They have galvanized our young union activists, and they've guaranteed that however long this takes, we will continue to fight them and their greed and their hatred of ordinary people. These 4 days of events that the Trades Council and ICTU Youth and others have organised are not just about providing a platform for an alternative voice or a platform for change, although that is important. They are, at a more fundamental level, about convincing you and others that change is possible, and also that we have a personal responsibility to use whatever talents or skills we may have to join with others to make that change a reality. We are the alternative. In the view of Belfast Trades Council, socialism is the alternative. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm now going to ask Max to give a contribution. He's going to talk for about 10 minutes or so, and when he's finished, he's then going to introduce George. Okay, thank you very much, Max.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm going to get my juices going. Got to get my energy up. What's happening? Yeah. So, we do our show in London. Many of you have seen it, I hope. And our purpose is to destroy the banksters. We want to destroy them so that when they wake up in the morning and they look at themselves in the mirror, they just want to stab themselves. We want to shame them. We want to guilt them. And of course, we get feedback. And we were doing our show recently, and we got some feedback, some letters. And we got one from, I guess it's one of them pesky regulators, Ofcom or somebody. And they were weighing in with their thoughts. And they were saying, this show, Keiser Report, you talked about George Osborne's scheme recently, his help to buy scheme, his reinflation of the housing bubble scheme, his mimicking of the Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac scheme in America that went bust that led to the 2007-2008 financial crash. You refer to that as a Ponzi scheme, and we've got a problem with that. So the next show was entitled George Osborne's Ponzi Scheme. And we delved into why the Help to Buy scheme by George Osborne is a massive Ponzi scheme. Basically, it requires more dupes to come in, buying housing at incredibly inflated prices to pay off the people early on in the Ponzi scheme, otherwise known as a pyramid scheme. These have been with us for years. It goes back to Charles Ponzi. And I was heartened to recently, while catching up on all the episodes of Downton Abbey, that Lord Crawley averted being sucked into Charles Ponzi's scheme by the very narrowest of margins. What a heartbreaker. And but that's pretty much how you could describe most of the banking in the UK. And around the world today, is that it is a kind of a massive Ponzi scheme. And first of all, I want to thank everyone who organized the event and George for letting me crash the party here, because I just showed up this morning and they said, yeah, come on up and do a few minutes. So I will, I'm just here for a few minutes, but I did want to just cover, to let you know that the folks here, if you're feeling a little queasy, a little unsure about the austerity measures that you're being asked to endure, the government's got some really good ideas to help you through. This is from the Times of London. The question is, short of cash? The austerity sandwich, scientists claim, as the cheapest lunch in Britain. It consists of 2 slices of bread surrounding a filling of another slice of bread. The cost is only 7.5p. So great is the belief that this is the cheapest sandwich that the scientists are offering £200 to the first person that can come up with a cheaper but edible alternative. How about a shit sandwich? Those are cheap. Choke on that! It's an austerity sandwich. Apparently this sandwich is 330 calories as opposed to the Marks & Spencer egg and watercress that comes in at 444 calories. So keep that in mind when you're shopping. A couple of factoids, brief factoids. That bankers in the UK cost each citizen in the UK, for every pound they produce in GDP, they cost £8.40. So that's not a very economical equation, is it? And yet that's pretty much the cost of the bailouts and everything else that comes with keeping this class of predatory monopolists and kleptocrats active and breathing in your society, these parasites. Parasites, I'm not against parasites. Our guts have parasites. They do a good job. They help things flow. But you don't want your society run by parasites. And yet this is what we have in the UK and around the world. You have the parasites that should be just at the tail end of your esophagus and alimentary canal chewing through bags of shit. They're now running public policy and they own all the assets. You're literally, the government literally has its head up its ass. Literally. Yep. Exactly right. Well, on that note, on that classy act, note. Now, if people know George Galloway, they know that he's, amongst other things, had a very great radio show in the UK on one of the talk radio stations, and it was the most popular radio talk show, really, of years and years, probably 20 years. And he always had as his theme music from this U.S. program and cartoon, actually, called Top Cat. So I thought it would be nice to bring him on with this theme song. The way the music goes is da-da-da-da-da, Top Cat. So I'm going to give you the signal, everyone together, and we'll bring George on. Are you ready? Okay. 3, 2, 1. Da-da-da-da-da-da. Top Cat. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Max. So glad you came.
Chair, brothers and sisters, comrades and friends, I have never been so introduced. I was going to say so insulted. So introduced. Max and I are becoming a double act, which might become more significant. We are two for the price of one, and that will become especially important during the Q&A because Max is a truly gifted and brilliant communicator of economics. And I know that economics is a science which blinds many. But the blinding truth is, as was just peerlessly described by Max, that capitalism is a system where the parasites have taken control of the body, or the lunatics have taken control of the asylum. And it's vital that all of us understand economics. And in the Q&A session, I hope we are all better educated than we currently are. It's a great honor to be invited by the Belfast Trades Council, where once in 1912, to be precise, my countryman and yours, James Connolly, moved a resolution here in this city, in this Trades Council. The resolution was for the establishment of an Irish Labour Party, about which more later. Not just the Irish one, but the British one, and what's happened to social democracy in the last 100 years. But that's later. Great. G8. Somebody tweeted me today to say, what does G8 mean? Is it like M8 in Twitter speak? Mate. Does G8 mean great? Well, they may be great in terms of their financial power and their military hard power. The leaders now gathering here in the north of Ireland may be great. And they have great influence as a 6 times elected 25-year member of the British Parliament. I had to climb through the teeth of Section 7 of the Terrorism Act to enter City Airport today. An officer wanted to know what I was doing here. I thought that was a strange question, as people like him no doubt claim that this is a part of the country whose parliament I sit in. My first thought was to ask him how he thought he had the right to ask me what I was doing here, that I might well ask him the same question. But he wanted to know if I was giving a speech and what was I going to give a speech about. I was able, truthfully, to tell him I have no idea what I'm going to say in a speech. literally until I say it, which gets me into trouble sometimes. But that if I did know what I was going to say in a speech in Belfast to the Trades Council, the last person in the world I'd give advance notice of it to is a policeman at George Best City Airport. The last person in the whole world. And I asked him, why are you asking us these questions? And he said, because I'm a police officer. And I said, and under what legislation? I can do that, you know. I've been long enough in the corridors of power. I can mimic how the powerful speak. I didn't say, do you know who I am? But I did say, under which legislation are you asking me these questions? And he said, Section 7. I said, Section 7 of the Terrorism Act. I helped to draft that. In fact, I opposed every line of it. But in that sense, I did help to draft it in a negative sort of way. And I pointed out that I did not recall any clause that gave a police officer in Belfast the right to ask a British member of Parliament what he was going to say at a meeting. Not least because at that stage I didn't know. But now I know. Great. As James Larkin, the great Irish trade union leader, said, the great only appear to be great as long as the rest of us are on our knees. And we are not on our knees. And the people on the demonstration this weekend are not on their knees. And the people on the video that we watched are not on their knees. The people in Greece that are on strike are not on their knees. The workers in Spain are not on their knees. In fact, all over the world, tens, hundreds of millions of people have risen from their knees and are telling these emperors that they have no clothes. They have beggared us. And that if this is the best that their system can offer, it's time we had a different system. It's time that a better world that is possible became a reality. That's what we are gathered for this weekend. That's what we believe to be the case. This very day is the birthday of another great Irishman of sorts. This is the birthday of Comandante Che Guevara Lynch. And as we think about that other world that is possible, then we ought to remember Che Guevara's example. He was not Cuban, but he fought for the liberation of the people of Cuba. He was not Vietnamese, but he fought alongside the people of Vietnam for the liberation of Vietnam. He was not an African, but he fought alongside the greatest of all African leaders, Patrice Lumumba, in the Congo against Belgian and British and American imperialism. He was not a Bolivian, but he gave his life's blood in Bolivia against imperial power. He did so because he didn't see the world in terms of borders or flags, tawdry pieces of cloth. His flag was red. His country was the future. And I believe that that's how we ought to view the world also. Because these divisions here today and gone tomorrow are as nothing compared to the division of wealth and power and class. Truly, the working men and women of the world have the same interest. And the rulers of the world have the same interests too. It's just that our interests are entirely different, distinct and separate from theirs. And that's the real division in the world, not between color or creed or sect, but between the relationship to wealth and power. And the people gathered here today and tomorrow, here in Ireland, are, as I said in my little contribution to that video, some of the most notorious organized criminals in the world. Indeed, if it weren't for the fact that they were hidden in Fermanagh, beyond our reach, if it weren't for the fact that they were able to employ police officers like the one at the airport today, it would be incumbent upon us to perform a citizen's arrest on many of the participants in this Congress for crimes against humanity. Because the imperial system over which they preside is no more than organized crime. They dress it up, of course, in different clothes at different times. In the past, they conquered an empire. Britain had an empire so vast that upon it the sun never set. But as my Irish grandfather used to say, that's because God would never trust the British in the dark. And we did it in the name of Christ, for God's sake. As Archbishop Tutu said, they came, they taught us to pray with our eyes closed. And when we opened our eyes, we discovered they'd stolen the entire country all around us, with their Bible in one hand and their carbine in the other. It was no more than organized crime. Orwell himself, in his first novel, Burmese Days, put it brilliantly in the mouth of Jim Flory, the colonial official based on Orwell's own experience. A young woman asks him, what's imperialism? He says it's going to other people's countries, killing them and stealing their things. That's what empire was. It's what empire is. And here I must mention the most significant piece of news of this day is the reported decision by President Obama to begin arming what he calls the rebels in Syria. The same rebels motivated by the same mindset that caused the deaths of thousands of Americans in the Twin Towers on 9/11/2001. The rebels who, if you can bear it, you can find on YouTube cutting open people's chests, taking out their hearts and livers and eating them in front of the cameras while shouting the name of God. If Obama is serious about this decision and that he has joined the British and French war party in Syria, then we are on the brink of a general regional war throughout the Middle East, from Persia to Palestine, and you better quail before that prospect. I don't know what the current price, Max will know, of a barrel of oil is, but you won't be able to find a barrel of oil at $500 a barrel if that regional war breaks out. No one will be safe anywhere on the globe if these maniacs pour this new ocean of petrol on the flames already burning in Syria. Russia, as Putin no doubt will tell them this weekend, has no intention whatsoever of allowing the United States to prevail in this conflict. Neither does Iran, neither does Iraq, neither does the Lebanese resistance, Hezbollah, neither does a substantial section of the Palestinian resistance, and neither does the majority of people in Syria. So be afraid, be very afraid at the conversations that will be going on in these corridors of that golf club in Fermanagh this weekend on that matter alone. But of course there are very many others. These people, as Professor Chomsky and others on the video made clear, cannot possibly be the solution to the problems we're in, because they're the people who created the problems we're in. The system of neoliberal economics, Thatcherism, Reaganomics, that they worship, and they do. I mean, they're not religious people. Religious people believe in the prophets, peace be upon them. They believe in the prophets and how to get a bigger piece of them. That's their religion. These people are presiding over the problem and therefore are unlikely to be the solution. The rubric of this gathering of gangsters is tax, trade, and transparency. Being lectured by them on tax, trade, and transparency is like being told to sit up straight by the hunchback of Notre Dame. Some of David Cameron's best friends are tax avoiders. Some of them are even tax evaders. And I can name names if I must. More than £100 billion a year is evaded or avoided in taxation by the richest people and the richest corporations in Britain. A year. Our entire deficit in Britain is less than 1 year's tax money lost to the exchequer by the tax evaders, by the tax avoiders. And Cameron has no intention whatsoever of closing tax loopholes or closing tax havens. In fact, the British flag flies like the Jolly Roger, like the skull and crossbones over some of the most notorious tax dens, where some of the most massive chests of hidden treasure stolen from the people of our own and many countries are buried. David Cameron has no interest in tackling Google, and the American government has no interest in tackling Google because, as we've learned, thanks to the brave whistleblower now being threatened with extradition from Hong Kong, Google is a part of the United States secret deep state, passing over all your information, everything you've ever Googled, that's got you nervous. Anything you have ever Googled is now stored in the banks, the memory banks of the National Security Agency of the United States. And I must say, I'm no businessman, but it has struck me this week that we're going to have our own Facebook, a Mick Facebook, a Mick Google, governed at least by the superior protection afforded here in the European Union. Because anything we do through these American organizations, institutions, it's clear, is passed in secret and beyond the law to the United States government and its secret state. The idea that they're going to do anything at the G8 to make these corporations who laugh in the face of the political class because they know that they are more powerful than the political class is simply fanciful. And what do they mean by trade? They mean free trade. They certainly don't mean fair trade. They don't mean trade that's going to benefit everyone involved in the equation. Their idea of trade is based on their own control of the world's resources, grotesquely mismatched. The United States, with 5% of the world's population, consuming 25% of the world's energy, an energy which they're ready to invade and occupy in order to guarantee supply at the price they want to pay. Just remember, when you see President Obama walking around, as you will in the next 24 hours, that he represents the country whose Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld said, and I quote, "It's not our fault that God put America's oil under other people's countries." You think I'm making that up, but he said it, and he meant it. And even if Obama's team are marginally, from time to time, less crude and vulgar about it, they feel exactly the same. And as for transparency, well, don't make me laugh. They couldn't get further away from us. They can't be among us. They can't allow us. They might as well be the Bilderberg group for all the transparency that's going to be on display this weekend. They are fiddling, some of them literally fiddling, while Rome burns. Throughout this continent of Europe, still more throughout the world. I saw a statistic, Paddy mentioned the question of malaria earlier. It's worse even than the figure that he quoted. A child dies of malaria every single second of every day of every year. And for 1 billion, it could be wiped out. The medicine exists that could wipe it out, but the money and the political will to wipe it out doesn't exist. But they will spend, if they attack Syria, £1 million per missile. And they'll fire hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of missiles if necessary. They have no money to keep our old people warm in winter, but they have endless money to go around the world setting other people's countries on fire. These are the lunatics who have taken control of the asylum. These are the parasites who are now in control of the body. We have a responsibility to speak out against them. If the mainstream media, as it's called, the lamestream media, as I call it, the lamestream media regards us querulously. I have been interviewed over and over again today by them, genuinely puzzled as to why we would look this gift horse in the mouth as if it were some kind of tourist convention that had come to your country. I'm not sure how much money they're going to spend. I fear they, like royal families everywhere, they actually won't have any cash on them. I fear that you'll be paying for everything that they consume here. But they will leave here with the world in no better place than it currently is. It's fashionable and easy to talk about the suffering in the poor world that these people ought to be addressing. And I'm going to take that as read. I want to just tell you a story about everyday folk here in this city, in the north of Ireland. Do you know that 6 people every week are committing suicide here in the 6 counties? That 3 people every day are committing suicide in the island of Ireland. Misery, unemployment, poverty, and hopelessness stalks our own land. And the capitalist system, which has created this wasteland, this post-industrial wasteland. I passed today Harland and Wolff, of which I once had some criticisms. Not because they built the Titanic, it was fine when it left Belfast, but because of certain employment practices they used to employ. But it's now a museum. By the way, it's £13.50 to get into the museum. So if you've got a wife and 3 kids, it's going to cost, I think, a family ticket's £40. That's a lot for a museum. But it's not the fact that it's a museum. It's the fact that the shipyard is a museum. It's the fact that the coal mines that I drive past every Friday on the way from London to Bradford, all those coal mines are museums. It's the fact that manufacturing is essentially a museum. It's the fact that a land that used to make things, that was once the workshop of the world, where sparks flew and hammers flied in the air, where ships of steel used to be made that then sailed the seven seas, laden with manufactures, has become what it is today, an economy, as Max says, dependent on falsely inflated bubbles of property prices and selling ice cream to the odd tourist who is prepared to brave our cold summers, cold, wet summers. It's the fact that capitalism has failed even us, the first capitalist country. The people who were building ships of steel when the Americans, sorry Max, were still cowboys, riding the rain, massacring the local population, killing them with chemical weapons. You murdering bastards that you were. It's the fact that capitalism doesn't even work here, doesn't even work there. 10% of the American people were unemployed. Hundreds of thousands of our people are now eating food from food banks. Can you believe it? They can't buy food, they have to go to a food bank and depend on generous donations from other citizens in order to keep body and soul alive. If capitalism can't even serve the interests of the people in the metropolitan countries, how can it possibly be the future for the 7 billion people on the earth, most of whom still have never made a telephone call? This world is ill-divided. It's run by the criminally incompetent. These people are of no hope. And I close on this point. Paddy said that we must all look for ways of undermining capitalism. On Max Keiser's show last week, I inadvertently revealed that I'm considering running for the position of Mayor of London when Boris Johnson steps down. Now that there's no Ken Livingstone, who's retired, there'll be no Boris Johnson. I think it's an open field, and I might well now be off and running. And I'm running in part on this, that Max Keiser is going to be my economics czar. And can you imagine how they feel about that prospect across the water in the City of London? Can you imagine how in the square mile, over whatever it is that they drink, they're contemplating the possibility that in 2016, I'll be the mayor of London and Max will be in charge of London's economy. They'll be tunneling their way out of the city. We won't execute them. I give you that promise. We won't execute them. We don't believe in the death penalty, even for them. But we will execute a regime whereby the finance capital and the financial services industry in London serves the people of London and not the other way around. We will execute. I mean, these people have to be seen to be believed. You're lucky in a way. You don't have to look at them. Goldman Sachs, where, having said I'd return to the issue of Labour, let me do so, where Tony Blair and Gordon Brown boasted to the partners of Goldman Sachs that every single one of them was paying less in tax under them than they had been under Margaret Thatcher, the aforementioned Margaret Thatcher. Imagine a Labour Party, as envisaged by James Connolly here in 1912, boasting to the richest people in the country that they were escaping paying less tax under them than they had been under the high priestess of free market capitalism, Margaret Thatcher. One of those partners, one, took home a bonus 5 years ago. He was a 30-year-old man. I don't have his address if any of you wanted to look him up. He took home a bonus in excess of £50 million in a Christmas bonus. One of the partners was so rich that his secretary, now in prison, stole £2.2 million out of his bank account and he didn't even notice. She was coming to work in a yacht. Yes. She was coming to work in a yacht and berthing it in St. Catherine's Dock, walking around jangling her jewelry, and her boss didn't know that the money had been stolen from him. So wealthy was he didn't notice the theft. This kind of world is not only immoral, but as was proved in the crash, this system doesn't even work. The idea that instead of making things in Harland and Wolff, or in Manchester, or in Bradford, instead of making wealth, things that we need to use, that you can instead have an economy based on gambling and unquantifiable, certainly ununderstandable to me. I once asked Max to describe the derivatives market to me, and I literally fell asleep as he described it. Impenetrable, completely incomprehensible, and in the end, utterly meaningless. People gambling on other people's gambles, whether his gamble's going to fall short or going to succeed. It is a kind of madness. But we'd be mad to allow it to continue, because there's nothing in it for us. Only the prospect that when it crashes, as it did, we will have to bail them out because they are too big to fail. Well, as that slogan said, they are the G8, we are 7 billion. We're too big to fail. We're too big not to prevail. And the first step begins tomorrow on your march. Thank you very much indeed for listening.